The ever-present and always hot-button issue here in the US, immigration. Be it legal, illegal, or historical, we just can't seem to stop arguing over it. For that reason, we're joined today by someone who grew up in a split migrant family who can give us some honest perspective. Welcome to the Just Dumb Enough podcast, a show that acknowledges no one is always an expert by dispelling misconceptions with real experts. I'm your host as always, Colton Petrie. My guest today is Lupe Christensen. Lupe was without a father or mother for most of her first decade of life because they were forced to flee their home country just to try and provide the minimal quality of life for their children. And as with many immigration topics, so often is it boiled down to what is illegally happening at the southern border. But the truth is that American citizens are truly struggling with some of the same problems, just trying to bring their legal spouses and children into the States. Let's change our point of view. Welcome to the show, Lupe Christensen.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so glad to have you on the show. Why don't you introduce yourself a bit for the audience?
Yes, absolutely. My name is Lupe Christensen. I am the author of the book called Where Money Grows on Trees. I do that as, just because I love writing. My normal job, 9 to 5 type of job is as an HR professional. And I also do real estate on the side. So I keep busy because I like to keep busy. So that's me.
Yeah, of course. Well, and it sounds like you have a lot of professions. So what kind of drove you to write a book?
Let's see, how far do you want me to go back?
As far as you want.
Yeah, I love that question because when I was young, when I say young, I mean when I was in high school. So I'm taking you all the way back there. I loved books. And because we were migrant workers, we didn't have a lot of money. So we used to pick cherries and fruits and other vegetables in the summertime and the wintertime. So, we didn't have the a luxury to buy books, okay, believe it or not. And so I used to save my pennies. And one day I saw that Jack Canfield wrote a book called Chicken Soup for the Soul. And I used my money that I had saved up to buy his book. And I fell in love with it. I was in tears. I read multiple stories that get printed in the book. And I just fell in love with that book. And I said, this book should be translated in every language possible. And so that gave me the idea to write my own book. I said, one day I will write a book just like Jack did. And so fast forward to, I got married, college, and then I got married. And I came across a journal that my mom was keeping. And I had the same feeling I had when I first read Jack's book. I couldn't believe it. She wrote with precision and just heart. She poured her heart into the information on the pages. So I took the journal. Of course, I asked for her permission, and she said, yes, you can write a book. And so I started translating because she wrote it in Spanish. So she was capturing her life and snippets of stories throughout her life, all the way to current. And so, and it was in Spanish, like I said. So I took the book or the journal and I started typing it in Spanish, and then I worked on translating it into English. But it's a very powerful story about her journey. She was born in Mexico, grew up in Mexico, and married my father, who was his family was a very powerful and influential family in Michoacan. And one day they lost it all. There was a brutal murder. I think I'm going on too much. You stopped me when you need me
No,
to stop,
you're
okay?
good. It's a captivating story.
So they murdered my grandfather and my dad. I called him in the book the Golden Boy because he grew up essentially a rich kid, privileged kid, had everything that you can think of, right? Money, influence, good looks, etc. So, but he lost it all. Him and my mother lost it all when they murdered my grandfather. And so my dad became an alcoholic. He didn't know how to cope with the death and the loss of everything, the power, the influence, you name it. And so he came to the US seeking treatment for alcoholism. And many months went by, and my mother didn't know his whereabouts. So she decided to come look for him in the US. And she did. She came out here, she found him, and she found him working in the fields, picking grapes, the grapevines. So this person who had everything you can think of, including the influence and power, is now a migrant field worker in the US. And, the reason why obviously is because no US work history, didn't know the language, he didn't know the culture, the customs. So that's what he could do at the time. And when my mom arrived here, even though she thought the US was Hollywood, right? Because well, I don't want to say everybody, but certainly she thought that America was like Hollywood because that's what she saw in Mexico and in the movies and with Elvis. So she thought everybody lived like Elvis and Jane Fonda and, those celebrities. So she imagined that life here. And because people said that when you come to America, it's a land of opportunity and you're driving in a big Ford truck. People wear gloves and hats. And so she had this picture in her head how America would be when she got here and when she joined my father in the grape fields, she found that that was not true. And so but she didn't back down, right, from the hard work and labor. So she joined my father and they became, farm workers. They left behind 6 kids in Mexico with my grandmother and my aunt. So they began to build a life here without the 6 kids. They had 2 kids here in the US. And it wasn't for another 4 years that my 2 older brothers migrated here. And then the rest of us came 6 years after. We reunited with them and we joined them in the fields, working early mornings till the field supervisor said to stop working. So I was about 8 years old, I think, when I came here to the US, and I was enrolled in school, but then quickly I was taken out of school in May so that I can join my parents in the fields in Stockton and Lodi picking cherries. So I missed a lot of school because I left school early before school was out, and I joined school late because I was picking apples in Washington. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, that's, I know I went into it deep, but it was right in front of me. So I'm like, okay, this is it. This is a sign. And so here we are.
Well, and it's interesting, the thought to like pick up everything you've ever known and move to somewhere else, hoping it's better. And even when you realize like it's not all Hollywood and there's a lot
Mhm.
of like very hard, very laborious work to stay here, that has to say something that you're like, this must be an opportunity, even if it is significantly harder.
Well, yes, and the alternative was to, either go back to Mexico and face the people that murdered my grandfather, who were also looking for my father. And so that was the alternative, is go back and continue to fight with those people. But, back in those days, there's so much lawlessness in Mexico was going on. And in certain parts, there still is. So that was the alternative. And, there are trade-offs. And so the trade-off here for my parents were leave the kids, 6 kids in Mexico, while we stabilize and decide whether we want to go back and face that, or we continue here, even though it's, you know, brutal work. But my parents always thought it's honest work. There is nothing wrong with picking cherries, picking apples, oranges, lemons. There is nothing wrong with that. It's an honest pay. So even though, yes, it may not be glitz and glamour, but the alternative was something that my mother would not want to do and didn't want to face or expose my father to, or the kids, because then, when they were in Mexico before they migrated here, my father was on a hunt for the enemy. Once he, realized what had happened with my grandfather, he was on the hunt for them, and it was a bitter time for my mom and my dad. So I would say that, my mom believes that it's the best thing, even though she did question herself many, many times if she made the right decisions coming here, right? Her father-in-law, wealthy man, he had already prepaid my oldest brother's education. He was to become a doctor. Some of us already had money saved up for education in Spain, etc. So, my grandfather had already planned our lives. And so to lose all that was painful for her. But, this country has been great to them. And she has not realized that, the second guessing she has done, or she did, about the decisions she made coming to look for her husband. She asks herself, or she did ask herself, not anymore. She's made peace with that she made the right decisions by coming to look for him and deciding to stay here versus going back to Mexico, where they lost everything. So, yeah, I mean, it's not easy, right? And I think it's easier for the kids than it is for my father and my mother,
Yeah.
who had to, make that change. I mean, that's a drastic change, right? Leaving everything, coming to a new country and starting from the bottom.
Well, and especially when you're talking about like leaving 6 children behind who are very young, those are formative years that you don't get to see your children. That would be an extremely hard move for most parents. I believe that she second guessed herself a lot because I think any rational person would.
Absolutely. I have 2 kids myself, and I don't think I would have done that. But it depends, though, the situation, right? The severity of the situation, pushed her to make those decisions. So I can't imagine me being in that place. And that's why I think her story is fascinating, and the courage that it took for her to leave her kids and come to this country, a country where she didn't know anything. That's very courageous of her to do. And it just goes to show you how mothers will do anything for their family.
Well, and it's not the first time I've heard a story kind of like this. I was actually just talking to somebody this last week who, after, 15 plus years of applying, has gotten approval to move to the US, but he can't move with his wife. Like, as a combined group, they don't qualify. So he actually had to divorce his wife so that
Mm.
he could move here and then she can move in, several more years. And they also have a child together. And so Like that's a very difficult decision that's kind of forced onto people just for, statistics sake.
Yes, unfortunately, there are a lot of stories like that. And I'll tell you something though, I feel that we were one of the lucky ones, even though, yes, our family lost everything, but we are one of the lucky ones. Our family stayed together through thick and thin. I lost two brothers, one to a car accident and another one to just natural causes. And so that's difficult. And I think that's a part of the reason why my mother questioned herself. Is she thought, what if I had stayed in Mexico? Would they still be alive today? Right. But she still believes, and I also believe that we're one of the lucky ones because there are so many cases, as you mentioned, where families get torn apart for many reasons. It's not just one reason, right? And unfortunately, that is something that's real, and it's an unfortunate and sad situation for
Yeah.
many families.
Well, I think a
Yeah.
lot of people, once you get to the US, you're like, oh, this is it. Like, we're settled, we're good. But I've had so many people I've either talked to on the show or I've met in real life who say, like, I have a buddy who met his wife who's Czech and they got married, but she can't be here during the application process. So even though they're married and he's a US citizen and always has been, like, he can't live with his wife, and that's hard. And I had somebody who came on here as a guest that after living here for 4 years and having an application in, was told they have to move out for the application to process, and then their
Hmm.
application gets denied. And they're like, so I just can't come back now? Like, what happened?
Yes. And I know some people as well who have struggled through that process. I have actually a friend of mine who is married and he came here on a work visa, right? And he's having a difficult time with the entire process, and he has two kids. So he's now, I mean, they just have so many issues that have come up and prevented them from being together. So now they're at the point where she is outside the country with the kids, and he is working here. And so now I think they have to be separated also for what he said, maybe 2 years. And it's just, I don't know, it's a touchy and sensitive topic, right? So many things happening, so many families separated everywhere, not just there with working families, but at the border, everywhere. It's unfortunate.
Well, and it's really hard to look at something like this and think like our system's working flawlessly. I think anyone who's been through any number of these, like regardless of where they were from or where their spouse was from, like have run into these issues in the US. And it makes me wonder, like, what do we need to streamline here to make this more effective? Why is it such a challenging process? If you're married to a US citizen and you have a child that was born here as a US citizen, like, why are you having a hard time getting approved for citizenship?
It's a systemic issue, really. And if I had the answer to that, because I see it all the time, and I hear about it all the time, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you about this. I would be out there doing something. But it's a huge problem, and it has always existed. It was just never really brought to light as much as it has currently, but that problem has been there uh, for many, many years. And not until our lawmakers, our politicians get on that and really address the root cause, we're always going to struggle with this, always. And it's not just here in California, it's across the US, it's everywhere. So, and it's not just one, group of individuals, is many, many. So, but it is a big issue that needs to be addressed. Like I said, if I had the answer, I would be somewhere else. But yeah.
Yeah,
It does need,
needs
you know,
reform. Well, and we keep seeing that, but we see it like pressed so hard from the media perspective to say like, oh, it's an issue, from South America or from Mexico. And I'm like, of four people that I can think of immediately, one of them is from Mexico, and then it's like the Czech Republic, Canada, and South Africa. So I'm like, 25% of my experience is what they're talking about, but I can see that it's happening in other avenues.
yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, and it's, it's, I don't want to say propaganda at times, but yeah, it impacts people across. It's not just people coming from the South, from Mexico specifically, right? I mean, I understand that's the border entry, but there are many different races coming from the south of the border here in Texas and other borders. It's not just Mexicans coming in.
Yeah.
So but yeah, it's a big problem and it does need to be addressed. And I think that it's not just a US problem. Like, honestly, Mexico has to support and be part of the solution, for example. So, any bordering countries, they need to play a role in addressing the issue. I get that a lot of countries, including Mexico, I've heard them say, well, it's a US issue, but really it's not just a US issue. So it's going to take everybody working together to address the issue.
Well, and it's one of those you would think, I know we're kind of skewing off topic here, but like you would think if you're one of the leaders of Mexico, you would want to see people stay. Because if I was a leader here in the US and I saw people like, flooding in all directions trying to get out, I would be very concerned about my own country. I wouldn't say like, oh, well, that's a problem for wherever they're going. I'd be like,
Right.
what's happening that people are leaving here so rapidly and so desperately?
A true leader would question themselves. I agree with you 100%. Yeah, I mean, it's a big topic, a sensitive conversation. And, that's why they're chosen as leaders, right? Because they should be addressing those issues that arise around immigration and, like you said, people leaving. If like in my business and as human resources, I look at turnover all the time, right? I know it's not the same, but people are leaving my organization. I want to understand why and figure out how I can retain them. So I would imagine that leaders in those countries would have similar concerns.
Well, and I mean,
Yeah.
it is very like, we could kind of put it on a one-to-one scale with what you do, because if the
Mhm.
average turnover was like 1% of the company and you're seeing 10%, you'd be like, okay, guys, we have a massive issue. It's colossal, it's systemic. I've got to figure this out because we are hemorrhaging employees.
Exactly. Yes. I mean that's yes, I agree. And sounds like a simple way of putting things, but I also think like that, right? I like you just said, I would imagine the leaders are doing the same thing because we do that exactly what you said. If I have 1% turnover, it's like, okay, my folks are happy and that's what I want. But if it's 10, 15%, 20%, then that's an issue. And if we're not doing anything about it, it's a shame on us, right? So that means it's a toxic environment in most organizations if you have like an excessive turnover rate.
Well,
Yes.
and this all kind of goes back to, like, I mean, the amount of time again that your mother and father had to spend away from you, like, was pretty excessive just to get you like as their children, where they're like, look, we are two grown adults and our children are in a different country. You would think that would be a faster process.
You would think, right? But yeah, I mean, those were the sacrifices that my parents endured to be here and, realize the American dream, prosperity, safety, security. So that's, I question that too. And I I never get a simple, straightforward answer, right? Because I do question, and I question my mom many times about that. And you know, there were different times, and I think generationally, the actions, the beliefs, the values are very different. Um, my parents were married. I mean, my mom never left my father. She was with him through thick and thin, through alcoholism, and she never left him. And I mean, nowadays, it's, yeah, our value system is very different.
Yeah.
So,
It is very different. But there's almost like, as much as they had to like pay the price to come here, where they're like this extremely hard work, yes, very honest work, but very hard work, you kind of had to pay a similar price when you came here. Because, like you said, you didn't come in at the start of schooling when everyone else did, and you didn't get all the schooling everyone else did because you had to go and work with your family. So, what was that like? Were you trying to play catch up kind of constantly?
all the time. So, I mentioned to you that we left school in May, like maybe I don't know, almost time for cherry season in Stockton and Lodi. So yes, we get picked up from school without notice, and we go straight to Stockton and unload our personal belongings from a truck, an old truck, and make ourselves comfortable at a labor camp. Sometimes we got lucky with a motel in the middle of Stockton. And so we picked cherries. And when we were done with Stockton and Lodi, sometimes we make our way to Gilroy, and from there up to Idaho. And we'd settle in a labor camp in Idaho. Now that labor camp was luxurious. Two tiny bedrooms and a small kitchen, but it was a lot better than the labor camp in Stockton and Lodi. So we picked, we stayed there in Caldwell, Idaho, actually, and we picked cherries through summer. We topped onions. I worked in a corn cannery. I was probably 14 years old, picking in a corn cannery, or not picking, but canning corn in a corn cannery. And then came apple season in the fall. So we worked through the apple season and then came back down to the Central Valley and enrolled in school again. And so we missed a lot of school and came in and started to catch up on what was missed. And because I didn't know how to speak English, I mean, I had to learn how to speak English and do homework. And back then, they didn't have the special programs they have now. I remember those programs were created when I was in high school, but at the time when I got to high school, I was not eligible for those programs because I was already proficient in English. So the students that were in those special bilingual programs, their GPAs were a lot better than mine, which was not fun because I felt like I had to work extra hard to catch up. And now here I am, struggling to keep up and catch up
Yeah.
and working doubly hard to keep up with my grades, my GPA, so that I can graduate from high school. So yeah, it was a struggle. And then when I went on to college, here's the other thing, right? I didn't have a role model. Everybody on TV looked different than I did. So it was difficult to maneuver and manage your career path when you don't have good role models. And as a matter of fact, I didn't even know what a role model was back then in high school. So when I went on to college, I went to community college, and the counselor there, he provided guidance to me because I mean that's what they do, right? I was just going along, and that was kind of almost my entire life is just going along, being a good citizen and taking advice of teachers, guidance counselors, And so my counselor at the community college in Visalia, it's called COS, College of the Sequoias. He advised me to take secretarial type classes so I can become a secretary. But that's not what I wanted to do. But because I'm a good person and I respect them, and that's the way I was brought up: respect and follow through with advice, etc. So I did, and so I took those classes. But I that's not really what I wanted to do, and I didn't want to say anything. But eventually I did. So I wasted 2 years in a community college taking typing, which is fine. I mean, I learned a lot, but secretarial type of courses, how to file, etc. And so when I made the decision to just plan my career on my own, I then decided that I wanted to go to a 4-year college and get a 4-year degree. So I had to plan it out. And so you can imagine all the mistakes I made because I no longer trusted counselors. I didn't trust that they had the best interest at heart. And they're not all like that, but unfortunately, I got one that wanted me to be a secretary. And so I planned my own college career, and it took me, I guess, 6 years to graduate from college. And again, part of that reason why is because I lost a lot of time, and also because I had to put myself through college, still working fields or packing houses to make money and pay for classes, for tuition. So it was not an easy road. And when you grow up in an environment like we did, where all we had was labor camps, orchards, fruits and vegetables, it's difficult to think that there's a different life or career path outside of that. And to break out of that, it's not easy. I'm hoping that someone hears my story and realizes that there is a different path and there is a way out from any situation. So sometimes you get caught up in a vicious cycle, right? But there is a way out. And it's about the mindset. You got to change your mindset and take action.
Yeah, well, and to say that you had to work extra hard is a bit of an understatement when you're like, I have to learn the language. I have to learn, most kids struggle like with basic math at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Or like, even to this day, I don't do long division well, right? It was just like a gap in my knowledge set. But
Mm-hmm.
you're like trying to learn English at the same time you're trying to do these things. And
Yes.
while moving, I mean, across the country, kind of, because you're
Mm-hmm.
moving from south to north. Idaho and Bay Area, California, even are 1,000 miles apart. So, like, you're moving a very long distance and working all these different jobs and still trying to catch up.
Right. And assimilate. That's another thing. My mother was big on assimilation. She wanted us to fit in and do well. And so she wanted to protect us from, any type of judgment, if you will. So she wanted us to be good kids, dress nicely, be like the other kids, be like the Brady Bunch kids, be like Happy Days kids. So we had to work at that as well. That's also work, right? When you're trying to fit in, assimilate, do things different than what you're used to. Your culture is different than, the culture that you're assimilating into. So it takes work, it takes adjustment, it takes you changing how you see things, how you approach life. It's also work. I mean, the way you maybe celebrate Christmas or Easter or not, there are so many facets of assimilation that we were doing on the go without education or without therapy. It was just, my mother leading us through that. So she make us watch the Brady Bunch, for example, or the soap opera Days of Our Life. And, she wanted us to dress nice and speak like the Brady Bunch kids. And so that's also a lot of work, and it's tiring work. So, it's just unbelievable. But you never think about those things. It's just kind of becomes second nature to you. It's just part of life.
Yeah, and just,
I,
surviving and getting through things because, we look at our world today and our perspective, right, as people who aren't in the school system anymore, we look at and we're like, wow, they have it so easy. Like, look at all the programs they've got and all the new
hmm
education and the technology. But like every generation really has like gained a lot from the one before it. So when you look at now to the 2010s, to the 2000s, to the 90s, like there's vast jumps in how integrated things became. And, like you said, you're looking for a role model, without being able to actually find one. And your mom's just like, here's the Brady Bunch. This is what I want you to model yourself after. And you're like, I don't connect with any of this. You see like Days of Our Lives, and you're like, this is horrible. Is everything going to be this dramatic?
yes, days of our lives. Yeah, oh, I have chills just thinking about that. But you're right on. And I don't want to make it sound like it's all bad, but it was a real struggle. But there are also a lot of wonderful things, right? Like you said, you go from the 70s to the 80s, and the culture evolves and technology evolves as well. And then there's change that comes with all that, and adjustment, right? But when I think about, for example, when my parents bought our first home in the Central Valley, it was the most amazing thing ever. We had the opportunity to run freely on the street without any, like, it was carefree, right? We lived in a carefree world. And I feel like we still do, but back then it was a different world. I mean, we didn't have cell phones. I mean, my mother wanted us in the house watching the Brady Bunch, and we wanted to be outside running. And nowadays it's the opposite, right? Moms struggle with getting kids outside and playing. But yeah, I mean, there were just wonderful things that happened in our lives as well. I mean, the purchase of the home was a big goal and a big accomplishment. And the graduation of from high school of my siblings, my parents were very excited and proud for that. My brother, one of my brothers, second to the oldest, his name is Josario, who is named after my grandfather. He became a police officer and served as a police officer for 19 years, 20 years. He retired from that. So, I mean, there's just, so many wonderful and beautiful things that have happened because we did move here, and because, this is a wonderful country, and it is a great country. And I understand why many people from all over the world want to come here. I completely understand. But it's not easy. You have the good and the bad, the yin and the yang, and it's a beautiful experience.
Yeah.
Beautiful experience.
Well, this is really like an overcoming story because you talk about having everything, like, having a brother that's all set up to go to be a doctor. And
hmm
now you're like, I hope we can get through high school. Like it's a severe change. And yet,
Yes,
like, it's
yes,
still a beautiful accomplishment when it actually comes through. You're like, this was incredible. Like, it still feels amazing to like fight those challenges and meet them as they hit you.
right. And my mom, I credit my mom for she's very religious. She's a woman of faith, and she shows gratitude in everything, for everything. And that's one of the things that I want to live the way she lives, in gratitude and in faith, because that's really the foundation and the reason why I believe we're here, and why we are who we are today, because of that, and because obviously her courage and her strength, and her gearing us and making us go to school, etc. But you're right. For example, with my brother, right? They all have their homes. They all, have great jobs. They all, and when I say free, I do mean free. If you've ever experienced, you know, poverty if you ever experienced discrimination or judgment, and then you get to a point where you're really feeling and have the freedom, there's no explanation of that sensation or feeling you have when you feel truly free from discrimination, judgment, poverty. It's a whole different level. And my mom brings it out all the time, right? With the coaching about being grateful, living in gratitude, being grateful for what you have. And that kind of level sets where we're at, right? So that we're not off to doing other things that we shouldn't be doing, but she grounds us with gratitude.
Well, now you're now literally in that kind of position because if we were talking to someone who's listening today that's in that situation where they are young and they're new to the country and they're struggling and they're fighting, like what would you tell them? What advice can you give them to help push them forward?
Keep fighting, keep fighting. And there are resources and there are people, and ask for help and look for role models. There are so many people willing to help. You just have to ask for it. And it doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't matter what color. It does not. You ask anybody, they will help you. And keep fighting. There's a better life waiting. I truly believe that there's abundance in everything. Life, whether you're into material things like money or cars or whatever, but life has abundance to give to everyone who seeks it. So whether you're seeking health, happiness, joy, it's out there. Whether you want to succeed, go to college, whatever you want to do, it's out there. Fight for it, go get it, and ask for help. Don't stop, don't give up. And it's never too late. Go after what you want. Never too
Truly,
late.
truly fantastic advice. And, I think it does people have some of those challenges where they're like, I don't know if it's pride or a mixture of shame and something else that you're like, I don't want to ask for help because I don't want to be seen as weak. Whereas most people that you run into are probably just happy to help. Like we want to help each other as people because it makes us feel good. So we don't really care like where you're operating from as long as we can do something. So, you have to kind of put some of that aside and then picking like a role model could be anyone, right? Like I know role models, like a lot of people assume like Bill Gates. I'm like, don't set that as your role
Mm.
model unless that's who you really want to be. I'm like, you could pick a guy in town that just has a job you like. That's easy as a role model. And you can talk to that person and you can say, like, how'd you get this job? What should I be doing? Look it up online. We have amazing resources. Our ability now to find role models of any size and variety is incredible compared to, when we have to like we used to watch TV and think like, okay, which one of these characters do I want to be like?
Absolutely, you're right on point. And sometimes though it feels like you may not be able to get out of your circumstances, but most situations and circumstances are temporary. And so the role model is a big thing, whether we, believe it or not. You do have to pick someone that you look up to. And you're right, it could be anybody, even a teacher, just anybody who's doing well, and it's someone that you might admire, or maybe they have a characteristic that you like to have, or that's, attractive to you. And yeah, and seek help. I mean, that's probably the best thing is that. Absolutely.
And absolutely, like I said, wonderful advice to leave people with. Lupe, thank you so much for being here. I want to make sure people can find you and the book if they're looking for you.
Yes. So my book, Where Money Grows on Trees, is on Amazon and in other retailers.
Fantastic. And if people go pick this up, I always give the same advice, but that's because it's genuinely good advice for every purchaser and author out there, which is leave good reviews because that helps
Yes.
people to find these things. Otherwise, a wonderful message, even like Jack Canfield, if he had written a book today, could easily be lost in just the mix of books that come out. Half of them that don't even have editing. And you're like, I have a genuine message that needs to get out there. And the way to do that these days is through good reviews.
Absolutely. Please, yes, I would appreciate a great review. If I had the opportunity to leave a great review for Jack back in high school, I would have, but there was no internet back then. Now I'm dating myself, but yes.
No, it's entirely the same, and I get it, because we were just like whatever book was on the shelf. That's how we found stuff. But think of Amazon like the shelf, and reviews put books on shelves. So
Beautiful.
if you like something, like leave a great review. It takes a half a second. Again, Lupe, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it. And I loved every minute of our conversation.
Hopefully this has opened up your eyes a little bit if you've never considered the outside option. I know so many of us today have friends that are in the immigrant community, and it's very hard. In ranking news, June is halfway over and the global ranks are updated. Number 1, the United States with Florida, California, and Wisconsin at the top. Number 2, England, the United Kingdom, just barely over Scotland. Number 3, Canada with Ontario just barely ahead of British Columbia. Number 4, Australia with Queensland and Victoria tied. And number 5, New Zealand just ahead of the Netherlands and Denmark. An interesting race this month. That's it for this week. Have a great week, a great weekend, and I'll see you all back here next week for another new episode. Until that next episode, pretty pleased to all those things that help the show grow, like rating, reviewing, liking, and subscribing. Also, remember you can reach out to dumbenoughpodcast@gmail.com or on any of the social medias if you want to reach me personally. But most importantly, stay dumb.